Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan. I've been thinking about the Warriors of Chaos lately. I know, it's kind of weird considering they've already had a DLC, you know, we've had the Champions of Chaos, but there are some very decently sized holes in their roster. You know, there's some Lord variants and Hero variants that we're obviously missing, which we'll probably get in the future. It's almost certain we'll get more DLC for Chaos, which will probably be Monogod DLC, but will hopefully help the Warriors of Chaos side because, you know, that cross-compatibility is actually really good. But yeah, those obvious holes in their roster will link towards some units that we're very much expecting, and unfortunately some units that don't even exist, I'm imagining, because, well, Games Workshop never really created units on an even basis, so even though we have 4 Chaos factions that all followed one book, there was an obvious bias towards one or the other. Now, the inspiration of this video comes because I've been painting up my armies, I've been getting some end times units done, which are, well, pretty much the ones that are missing from the rosters in the Monogod factions, and it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. So let's talk about these units and the possible ones that we might see being created from scratch. And yeah, let's have a little bit of fun. Now, we're going to start off with Nurgle, as it's simple enough, because Putrid Kings, right? These units would essentially be the aspiring champions of Nurgle, because isn't it weird that we just don't have aspiring champions which are Monogod touched? It's because it's likely that we're going to get these marked units. Now, the Putrid Kings were introduced in the end times, but they did exist in lore prior. It's just how it works, that they were established and released there, but it was spun in a way that they've always existed. Yes, they said no end times, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to go and get some units that are linked up and make sense. Think about it this way. We use Age of Sigmar versions of the Demons of Sunesh, right? We've got end times versions and end times units already in game, so it makes sense to bring in the Putrid Kings, especially since Nurgle kind of needs a bit of a powerhouse unit. So, in the tabletop, they would have a few different variants, and the idea is they were totally mixed. It was kind of like how, well, just the man-eaters worked on the tabletop, but as we've seen that man-eaters have been split up into their own separate units, it's very possible that we could just have Putrid Kings with sword and shield, additional hand weapons, and great weapon. That already gives us 3 different ones, and it's using the same model, just a few different animations. Now, we could also have a mounted version too, which was an Age of Sigmar specific unit. These were the Puscoils, and the fact is, well, you know, it's just Putrid Kings mounted. It's the same model. It makes a lot of sense to be able to have that, especially since many people are calling for the Rotflies to also be a mount option for the Chaos Lord and Sorcerers of Nurgle. Because wouldn't you want that, right? It's actually a really disappointing thing that only some of the characters in the Warriors of Chaos roster now have their god-friendly mounts. Like, we got the Disc of Tzeentch, and we've got the Juggernauts, but we're missing some other ones for the, you know, the Nurgle and the Sunesh one. And yeah, it needs to happen eventually. It desperately needs to happen eventually. So this is what you'd get. The Putrid Kings would be absolute powerhouses in terms of damage. You know, they'd be your aspiring champions. You could boost them up with the same tech as aspiring champions, or at least that's how I would see them. So it'd be just absolutely terrifying. The Puscoils could also work in a very similar way, but upgraded. You know, these are Rotflies. They're fast. They're able to do a decent amount of damage. The idea is they just look cool, and the fact of the matter is this would easily fit in Warhammer Fantasy because both of the things did exist in Warhammer Fantasy, so mixing them both together is just a new unit. Games Workshop can spin it as that too, despite the fact that it exists in the future, because Age of Sigmar is in the future. Because let's be very realistic here. Are you telling me in the hundreds of years that, like, Chaos Warriors existed, well, thousands of years that Chaos Warriors existed, none of them thought, oh, I'm just gonna mount up on a Rotfly that Nurgle has blessed me with? Because if the Chaos Warriors of Khorne can magically mount up on a Juggernaut, why can't they mount up on a Rotfly, right? Right, Khorne is missing some stuff too, but they've already got like a nice mounted version, so I don't think they need anything else. What I would say is likely just, you know, Wrathmongers and Skull Reapers. The Wrathmongers and Skull Reapers are, again, end times units, but again, the idea is that the lore makes them act like they've been here for a long time. So, Wrathmongers are pretty cool because they're just flail infantry, like monstrous units. They used a 40mm base back in the day, very strong if you could get a good charge on them. Whereas the Skull Reapers, they had different types of weapons. You could add them with either a great weapon or additional hand weapons. I don't know if they had shield options. It's one of the units that I haven't done yet, mostly because they've got so much trim on their armor, and I'll be very honest with you, I don't like painting armor trims. In all fairness, Khorne doesn't need too much because in terms of warriors, they're pretty much done. Hell, even if they decided, if Games Workshop properly allowed them to go into the actual Age of Sigmar units, there's really not much that they can do. Like, there is literally very, very little that they can bring in for Khorne, unless they decide to give them like a shaman type character, which is something that's desperately needed, since you're not really using magic. But yeah, everything else is just like, it's done. Khorne is almost fully complete. Again, you never know in the future for Warhammer the Old World if new stuff comes out, but really there's only so much that you can do with a race that doesn't really like to use ranged weapons, despite having a cannon, doesn't really like to use magic, despite having summoners. But hey, the lore makes sense when the lore has to make sense, right? So Tzeentch is probably the most interesting one so far because yes, they do have a completely new unit in the form of the Doom Knights. And this is likely a little preview of what we're going to be able to see in Warhammer the Old World as, well, yeah, like they never existed in the lore. We had characters and stuff and it was kind of mentioned, but this is like absolutely cementing it. It's the first time that we're seeing squads of knights mounted upon discs of Tzeentch and yeah, just doing some damage. Fun unit, very fun unit. A little bit too squishy for my liking, but then again, Tzeentch's forces, like not even just the Warriors of Chaos, but even the Demons just feel a bit too weak. They are in desperate need of an aspiring champion style unit though. The problem is that there's just literally nothing there for them, right? Even going into Age of Sigmar, there is no aspiring champion unit style there, so it's very likely that something needs to be created by Games Workshop / Creative Assembly. Then again, we're expecting something, if the rumors for Warhammer the Old World are true, that we are going to get some sort of Monogod style army books. Those are just like faint rumors, and it would be cool though. It would definitely be cool. But the way I imagine a Tzeentchian aspiring champion is kind of how they deal with the big greater demons in the demon rosters, where you can actually give them some bounce spells, and I think that would work out quite well. But maybe not draw from the Winds of Magic itself, because you wouldn't really have that many wins. I mean, that could work, but it would be nice if they just had 1 or 2 charges and that's it. That might be too strong, however, but then again, for a campaign basis, it's campaign, right? When it comes to multiplayer, money restrictions come into play, so you wouldn't really be able to get a full army of aspiring champions of Tzeentch. It could even be done in a pretty fun way where you'd have 3 different variants. So sword and board, halberd, and great weapon. I was going to say halberd and shield, but that's not a thing, which is really surprising considering that how that was so important on the tabletop. Or at the very least, just the 2, so sword and board and halberd. And what you'd do is you'd have sword and board with maybe the Lore of Tzeentch, so a few bounce spells from that, and then the halberd version with the Lore of Metal, like 2 bounce spells from that. But lastly, we look towards Sunesh, the best Chaos God, and I don't care who says otherwise, and it would be simple enough to just bring in some stuff from Age of Sigmar, but I don't think that would work out, mostly because the aesthetic has changed very drastically, which is a bit of a shame because I love these miniatures. I absolutely love the Hedonite of Sunesh stuff, but we do have something very similar. You see, we do have a missing mount option, which, you know, is pretty cool. It's the boob snake, essentially. That's what most people call it. With the character mounted upon it being a character that was Styrka from the Storm of Chaos, but I imagine that they could reuse the assets because those Myrmidon-style characters, as you can tell, they're very similar to the Myrmidesh for Age of Sigmar. Could be used as proper units. Like, those could be great aspiring champions. Spear and shield type of weapon, because why not? And then a sword and board variant, and then obviously a mounted version too, which would be a monstrous cav mount. It would be very, very fast. Think of it very similar to the Juggernauts, just not as durable, but much, much faster. So really good at flanking. Plus, I mean, we really need this mountain game. We do. Again, it will be very useful for the Lords of Sunesh and the Heroes of Sunesh. But that would pretty much fix up the missing units for the Warriors of Chaos, essentially. Yeah, there could be some stuff added here and there. There is some stuff missing from the lore. But the main thing for me was just the aspiring champion style units, because we need some big units, especially if you want to, like, you know, have some higher tier stuff. It's just a bit weird that it just never got completed. Champions of Chaos was great, don't get me wrong, and it came with a lot of different things, but it did lack original stuff, if that makes sense. And there's still time for DLC. Hopefully they'll keep to the whole 3 DLCs this year and make that the norm for next year, or 4 would be great. But I imagine the DLC plans are written out. I mean, we're still missing some pretty big units for the Warriors of Chaos, you know? The Slaughter Brute, the Mutilef Vortex Beast. It's kind of weird that they're not in-game, especially since Champions of Chaos had a lot of mention of the Slaughter Brute. But I imagine if a Khorne DLC does happen, which, you know, Skull Taker or Scar Blood Wrath would be great, then we'll likely see the Slaughter Brute. They were probably saving that for a nice big Khornate DLC, which even though the Slaughter Brute isn't a Khornate monster, it's just basically a Chaos Spawn essentially. It ties very closely to Khorne. And I imagine these units being introduced not in a Champions of Chaos style DLC because, let's be honest, we've had it once for Warriors of Chaos. We don't really need it again because they already have, like, what, 9 Legendary Lords? More? But the Monogods, yeah, and you can easily think of characters, right? Tamukan is one of them, Scar Bloodwrath, because Mortals, they did say that Mortals were possible for the Monogod Legendary Lord roster. And I know there's going to be a lot of Chaos fatigue out there, don't get me wrong. I'm just a very big fan of Chaos, and it does make sense to do a lot of Chaos versus other factions. Empire versus Nurgle is the one that I'm really, really waiting for. And then Khorne versus Kislev would be kind of fun. Just in general, there's a lot. Sunesh versus Hyos. Their options are endless, and it will just finish out everyone together in a sense. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of the discussion. Apologies if this video is late. I'm actually working on a super fun project for you guys. No, it's not DLC, don't you worry about that. But it is involving modding. I think I'm almost there with my first mod. And I think you guys are really going to like it because I've put in a decent amount of hours into it already. But anyways, you guys have a lovely day and I'll see you all again very, very soon.